Muted.
A number of you have requested to be added as a presenter. I've chatted back to you. If you can respond there in the chat window. For everyone who's joining, just so that you know, lines are all currently muted. We'll open them up again right at 2. We're just letting everybody get on with muted lines. So if you're trying to talk, just know that your lines are currently muted. Please use the chat box if you need to submit any messages or questions at this time. Just a reminder that all of our lines are currently muted. We're still waiting for remaining people to sign in. We will get started right at 2 p.m., which is in 2 minutes. Hi, this is Julie Fitch speaking. We just got notification that this webinar is full, that it maxed out at 100 people. So if there's any way for people to gather around one computer so that will free up space for other people to join us, that would be great. But please also know that we are recording this webinar so that folks can, those who are not able to sit in it today can enjoy it later. And then, if you want to. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Julie Fitch at the OPH STD HIV Program Office in New Orleans. Jessica Fridge and I are going to be taking you through a webinar today, but first some housekeeping items. Everyone on the line is on mute right now. If you have a pressing concern or question, feel free to use the chat box, but we will unmute everyone once we get through the PowerPoint presentation so that we can answer as many questions and concerns as possible in the remaining time. So please do jot down your questions so you don't forget them as we go along. And like I said, we'll unmute everyone after the PowerPoint presentation is over. Okay, so again, my name is Julie Fitch. I am the Testing and Capacity Building Supervisor here at the STD HIV Program. And the purpose of this webinar is to discuss the updated HIV testing algorithm that will be run at the OPH State Lab starting February 6th. So this is the CDC recommended algorithm, and it includes up to 3 tests, with the first test being a 4th generation HIV test. The second test in the algorithm is what's called a differentiation test that differentiates between HIV-1 and HIV-2. And then the third test, which isn't always used in the algorithm, is a NAT test. And so we're going to talk more about each of those pieces and the results as we go along. But to give you some background, with the release of improved HIV detection tests, we now have the ability to detect HIV infection earlier and identify patients in the acute phase when high levels of virus increase the likelihood of transmitting HIV infection. So when people are in that early acute phase of HIV, they are most infectious and able to very easily, more easily transmit HIV to other people. So it's really important that, that we're able to find those individuals, if they come to get tested when they're in that phase, that we can identify them as such and quickly connect them to further testing and treatment. So right off the bat, I just wanted to say, for many of you, we are aware that you are doing point-of-care rapid testing.
This webinar is not suggesting, and the new algorithm at the State Lab is not suggesting that you change what you're doing. Please do continue doing rapid testing if that's what you're doing. And we do advise it because it is the fastest way to connect people to care. After you get 2 reactive rapids, immediately connecting or linking that person to HIV care, to a viral load, is the fastest way to get people in care. But even if you are doing rapid testing, we wanted you to know about this new algorithm and the 4th generation test because you could still access it from the State Lab, especially in the instance of those bottom 3 bullets. So if you have a patient that tells you that they have had unprotected sex with a person that they know is HIV positive, it's a good idea to go ahead and do a 4th gen test on them in case that exposure was recent and they could possibly be in an acute phase of HIV. Or if a patient discloses to you that they've had unprotected or condom-less sex with a person who injects drugs, that might be a good opportunity for you to use this 4th generation test with them. Or if a person is symptomatic of acute HIV infection, which is a little tricky because acute HIV can often look like the flu or flu-like symptoms. But if they're having flu-like symptoms, and especially if one of the previous bullets are shared with you, if someone is feeling like they had the flu and they tell you that they've had unprotected sex with a person who they know is positive and or a person who injects drugs, it's a really good idea to go ahead and pull blood from them to send off to the lab for this kind of testing. So just quickly, antigens are produced by HIV shortly after infection, and specific antigen tested for in HIV is the P24 antigen. And so this ability to detect the P24 antigen is what makes a test what we call a 4th generation test. Antibodies, as you all know, are proteins your immune system generates as a defense against infections. Antibodies are produced after antigens. Antigens always come first. So being able to use a test that can detect antigens can shorten the window period in which people may test negative despite having been exposed and acquired HIV. So what is an acute infection? So an acute infection is the very early initial stage of HIV infection when the virus is multiplying rapidly and the body has not yet developed antibodies to fight HIV infection. HIV antibody tests will not generally detect HIV infection during this early acute stage of infection because the antibodies haven't been produced yet, right? So the lab indications for an acute infection are as follows: very high viral load levels, the testing algorithm, which we're going to talk about this testing algorithm in much more detail after this slide, but suffice it to say, if the first test is antibody negative but antigen positive, the second test, which is that differentiation test, was negative, and then the third test, which is the NAT test, is positive, that's an indication of acute HIV infection. Or in testing history, if the person has a negative or indeterminate HIV test in the previous 180 days or 6 months prior to the first positive. So I just wanted to, it's not on this slide, but I wanted to make a note of the importance of linking positives to care. And we need to make sure that we're doing a warm handoff and not a passive referral to care. So this really goes for all positives, but particularly if you come across an acute infection, it's really important for all positives, and especially acutes, to stop what you're doing and call and get that person appointment if the client is willing for you to help them with that. Go ahead and help them get an appointment right then and there, if at all possible. And if you are not sure where in your region or your area to refer to someone or to help them get an appointment at an infectious disease clinic or an HIV specialty care clinic, then for those of you in the public health units, the regional nurse consultant should have that information. And if they don't, I am always a good resource. I can help you figure out what the options are in your area. So don't let that be a barrier to helping people connect to care as quickly as possible. So with that, I think I am going to pass it over to Jessica.
Hi, everybody. So we're going to go through a number of slides, probably about halfway through. I'll stop and see if there are questions. You know, we want to put out there, and some of you may be familiar with this testing if you work at, you know, other facilities that have moved on to this 4th generation testing. But this is actually testing that has been made available a few years ago. We were really just waiting for the state lab to acquire these new products, you know, make the changes required in STAR-LIMS, and then we needed to make some changes in the EHR. But this, you know, the traditional 3rd generation and Western blot testing that the lab has been running really at this point is no longer gold standard for care. Really, this 4th generation test followed by what we're going to call the Genius test, that is really gold standard testing at this point. And so we're really excited that the state lab is now ready and that this is going to roll out the 1st week of February. So on the slide in front of you that you can see is a fairly interesting graphic, but what this goes through and shows you are the different pieces that Julie already talked about and of the virus and the body's response to that virus and how quickly your body makes them. And really the take-home message about this slide is that our new testing algorithm really is helping us find people sooner, so sooner after they've been infected, which is a relief to patients to be able to be tested sooner after that infection, the day that they were infected. And so the blue line on this graph, that's representing the virus, and it's showing how much virus is in your body. And so you can see within those first 40 days or so that we've marked as acute HIV infection, the body has a lot of virus, and that is why people are more infectious. They have more virus in their system, they may not have been diagnosed yet, and so they are more easily able to infect other people. And so we really want to find people in this acute HIV infection stage, get them on medication. That's better for their immune system in the long run. And it's also better for the community because then they are aware that they have HIV and that they're very infectious and need to take precautions. So the pink line that follows, that's the P24 antigen. So your body, the virus has a protein in it called the P24 antigen. It's available in the body at very high doses early on in your infection, but then when the antibodies start being produced, which is the brown line, the antibodies are what then tag the antigen, making the antigen really no longer an item that can be screened for in somebody's blood. So when we're talking about tests, HIV tests, some of you use you know, the Determine test that is looking for that P24 antigen. It can really only be found in the body when people are newly infected, which is great because that's what is going to help us find people that are or are not acutely infected. So the next slide is sort of all over the place, but this is what, when we refer to the new HIV testing algorithm, this is the algorithm. So as Julie mentioned, there are 3 potential tests that are going to be run. So at the very top where it says 4th generation HIV 1-2 immunoassay, that is test number 1. That is the 4th generation test. That is going to replace the state lab's 3rd generation EIA, the one that comes back as HIV 1-2 repeatedly reactive. This is replacing that test. So the state lab is having to completely replace all of its systems around HIV. So when we run this test, it can come back as reactive or positive, or it can come back as non-reactive. And it can look, what it's looking for is not only antibodies for HIV-1 and HIV-2, which is what the other one could do, the old one the state lab was running. It could do this as well. but it is also looking for that P24 antigen. So if we go back, it's looking for that pink line, which is only going to be present if you've been infected for a short period of time. So before, the third generation test was only looking for antibodies. The fourth generation test is now looking for antibodies and the P24 antigen. So going back to our algorithm, if we get a non-reactive result here, testing is done. The person is considered to have no confirmation for HIV infection. That doesn't mean with 100% certainty that the person is negative. It just means that no amount of testing is really going to be able to find that person as positive. And so really, if there are indications like recently having been exposed to HIV, some of the items that Julie talked about, then that person should still be counseled to be retested in the near future. So let's move on down the line and follow the arrows if that fourth generation test is reactive or positive. So this is the same as a screening test coming back positive. This is just a different version of that screening test. Now what we've got is, instead of it going to the Western blot, we are now going to be moving to a test at the state lab that is called the Genius. And we're going to walk through what the Genius is in a little while. But the Genius is new in the sense that it can tell the difference between HIV-1 and HIV-2. The Western blot could only read for HIV-1. So this new test can tell the difference between HIV-1 antibodies and HIV-2 antibodies. In this new test, parts of it can be positive for HIV-1, and then it can be negative for HIV-2, which is the first scenario, or the opposite. It can be positive for HIV-2, negative for HIV-1. It can be positive for both. This is sometimes called cross-reactivity. And then the fourth option is that it's actually negative for both. The really important piece here is if this test is negative for both, the testing algorithm does not stop. So before, if you had a positive screening test and a negative Western blot, the testing stopped. Here, the algorithm actually has a third test that it's going to reflex to all by itself. So when you draw blood, you will be drawing enough for it to go through all three of these pieces. You don't have to get the client back in to run this third test. So if it is negative for both, or what it's saying is it didn't find any antibodies. But remember, if somebody is acutely infected, they probably don't have enough antibodies yet. So a negative test here in the middle does not mean that the person is HIV negative. All it means is the body hasn't made enough antibodies yet, or there are no antibodies to be found. So it's going to hop down then to the third test, which is our NAT test. This is also called an HIV qualitative viral load, but here it's actually looking for the virus. And so here, if it's reactive, that's a really good sign that this person has acute HIV, because the screening test was positive, which probably means that it found the P24 antigen. Then the middle step was negative, so it barely found any antibodies, but then it's positive for the virus. And so this is a sign that somebody is very acutely infected because they've got all the viral markers, but their body hasn't made enough antibodies yet. And this is somebody we would have completely missed with the old testing, with the third generation and Western blot testing, because that testing algorithm did not look for any of the viral markers. If here, in this scenario, the NAT test comes back non-reactive, then this is most likely a case where the screening test was a false positive. But again, if somebody is indicating that they have recently been exposed, even if it comes back as a false positive, that person should be counseled to come back in and get retested. So the Bio-Rad combo, antigen-antibody combo, That's the 4th generation test. That's what's replacing our 3rd generation EIA. And just as a reminder, it's going to screen for antibodies for HIV-1, antibodies for HIV-2, and the P24 antigen. So it's got 3 pieces that it's looking for. And just a description, so it is an enzyme immunoassay. Again, it's looking for all of those 3 pieces that I mentioned. This is from a blood sample that you are going to send off to the laboratory. And it is really serving as a screening test. So it begins the algorithm.
Hello? We can't hear anything.
Yeah, apparently now everybody's trying to get back in.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? I hear somebody.
Someone.
Someone. We are working on the time. Turn it down. Thank you. 14 copies. Diane, I think mine is, huh?
I'll be back.
Hello?
I hear something.
Hello?
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 Everybody's saying the same thing.
I know who we're hearing.
Thank you. Hi. All right. How was that?
Antigen that starts before the antibody.
Are they taking questions now?
Picking up this T24 is fourth generation. Yeah. Well,
Like the attendees are hearing each other and they're not here. We can't hear them.
That's right.
Hello? Hello?
Not hearing anything the presenter's saying.
We're just hearing each other.
That's right.
I have some at the house already.
Oh, you closed in.
Okay. Bill. Okay.
All right.
I think this they have.
Hi. Can you all hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, we're back.
All
I
right.
can hear you now.
Yeah. Somehow our audio got lost, so we'll let everybody have 10 seconds to. We appreciate everybody hanging with us. We see that we still have about 100 attendees, so that's great. And just give it one more minute, and we will resume the webinar. Sorry for that interruption. We don't know exactly what happened there. Can anybody chat to me the last thing that they heard?
It was
Or just tell me.
your oh gosh. It was
Algorithm.
algorithm. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the word. They was
This one?
right after the algorithm. Yeah, that's the last slide.
There you go, right there.
This one right here. Okay. Okay, perfect.
How do we mute ourselves?
I can mute all.
Can you do that?
Yeah. I'm going to mute you all right now. All right. Okay. So sorry. Technical difficulties. Okay, so here we go. So, so we got through the algorithm, and we talked about that our very first test on the algorithm can tell the difference between antibodies for HIV-1, antibodies for HIV-2, and then our P24 antigen. And that's really the game changer, and I'm apologizing if I am repeating stuff. I just want to make sure I didn't lose anything. So the game changer with this screening test is that it can see that P24 antigen. And I'm just going to flip back to the graph to show again why that is so important. So remember the sort of highlighty pink color on here is a P24 antigen, and it's really only present in any kind of quantifiable amount in your body when you're newly infected. And so now it's a game changer that we have a screening test that can find this very specific antigen in a very short period of time. And the third generation test that we are so used to, that the lab has been using, was incapable of finding this P24 antigen. So moving backwards, and I don't want to make anybody dizzy, but when we move back here, and we're not going to go through like the reagent and how this works and all that stuff, we just want to make sure that you're aware that really the algorithm at the State Lab is a complete overhaul of everything that's being run. The third generation EIA, the Western blot, and then there's a new unique third test as well. So pretty much this has already been said, but just a reminder that the most important parts are that it's seeing both pieces of HIV or both types of HIV and the P24 antigen, and that's what's going to be able to help us find acute HIV infections. So we follow up if our first part, which is our fourth generation test, if that is reactive, we're going to move along to the Genius test. And as a reminder, if that first screening test is not reactive, the testing is done. So we move on to the Genius test. This test is an antibody test only, just like the Western blot. This is not all that different from the Western blot in terms of what it's looking for. Here it's looking for antibodies for HIV-1 or HIV-2. We no longer call it a confirmation test. It's called a supplemental test, and that's because it's really not the end of the road any longer. Before we had our screening test, then we had our Western blot, and that's all we had. That's all the testing we did to try and confirm somebody as being HIV positive. Here, the Genius test is really just a middle step, potentially, and so we call it a supplemental test. And this, we're about to show pictures, is really completely different technology. I don't know if anybody's ever seen a Western blot be run or understands that it actually requires, physical, a good amount of interaction. That's why the testing takes a lot longer. But this is a cassette and a reader. Oh, sorry, I skipped. So just as a reminder, there are two unique viruses in the world for HIV. One is considered to be HIV-1. It is far more common. It is the prominent type of HIV in the United States and North America, and certainly here in Louisiana. There is a second virus called HIV-2. They are genetically different, so we are able to test for them separately. I will say, some places in the United States do diagnose a bit more HIV-2, but it is rarely from somebody that was, born in the United States. Often these are immigrants that are coming to the United States being tested for HIV, and they are found to be positive with HIV-2. So the Genius reader is this sort of triangle-shaped apparatus on the left. And then the cassette that you put the specimen on with the reagents is the rectangle shape on the right. And so each unique specimen is placed onto a cassette and put into the reader. The machine itself then spits out a result for this test. So it doesn't require a human person to read the result. It actually spits out into the test result exactly the result for this specific test. So this is an up close of the cassette, and then the next slide is going to be a zoom in just on that sort of very skinny rectangle portion, just to show you that what it's looking for are two different HIV-2 antibodies and then 4 different HIV-1 antibodies, including an antibody for the P24. And then it's got a control band there at the end. So it is looking for more HIV-1 antibodies than HIV-2 antibodies, but HIV-1 is also far more common in the United States. So that makes a lot more sense. And then the reader itself, like we talked about, it doesn't require any human to visually read the results. It's all automatic, and then the system is just connected at the state lab into their star limbs, and then we're going to go through a large number of examples about how the results could turn out when you receive them back from the lab. So this gets a little complicated, but I think we're all really used to the Western blot where it comes back as positive, or it comes back as negative, or it comes back as indeterminate, right? So we had 3 options. The Genius test now actually gives us 8 options. You are not going to have to capture all 8 necessarily in the EHR, but it is important to realize that not when it comes back as indeterminate, it can actually tell us the difference between, is it talking about HIV-1 indeterminate, or is it talking about HIV-2 indeterminate? It can tell us the difference between this specimen is HIV-1 positive or it is HIV-2 positive. And then there are going to be some very rarely used results that you can see on here. One is HIV positive untypable. That means it can't tell the difference between HIV-1 or HIV-2. A similar result is the one that all the way at the bottom that says HIV-2 positive with HIV-1 cross-reactivity. This means that it found more bands of the HIV-2 and very few HIV-1 bands, but it still can't accurately tell the difference. So the machine itself is able to give out these 8 different results. You will see all of these results in the examples we're going to go through, but again, these are not in different ways. You'll be capturing these in the EHR. So we're about to walk through how to do this, how the StarLab, how the labs are going to result out to you versus how you get them into the EHR. I'm going to unmute lines and just see if there are any questions at this time, because I know we have had a lot of information in a short amount of time. So everybody should be unmuted. Just feel free to ask a question if you've got one about anything we've covered. Everybody's great.
I have a question for those of us on via telephone, because we couldn't sign in because it said the session was full. We can't see the slides. Will this be available later?
Yes. Yep. It sure will.
Thank you.
Yep. Let me see. Yeah, we're still maxed out at 101. I was going to see if people had dropped off, if you wanted to try and get back in. But we will most definitely send the slides out, and feel free to, reference them as you start getting these results back from the lab. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody again. We're going to go through a lot of examples. I will try and point out when, the ones where I feel like these are common ones you will see versus ones that I would, if you ever see one, I would be incredibly surprised. But we did want to cover all the bases because you never know what you're going to get. Okay, so everybody's muted again. Okay, so again, what you are used to getting from the state lab is about to change very soon. And it does take a good bit of time to get used to these results, get used to the idea that just because the Genius test might come back negative, that does not mean somebody does not have HIV. So again, we're going to walk through those examples, and Julie and I are going to try and chime in really where it's on the acute infections, where we're really going to be worried about getting somebody into care really as quickly as possible. So this is, Gail Gibson did a screenshot of what the new lab portion of the EHR will look like for your entry, and the options that she has added for this 4th generation test. So even though the test overall could have as many as 3 different parts, it is only going to be ordered and entered as one test. And up here you can see, and I don't know if you can see this arrow, but if you look at the top, you can see it says HIV 1-2 antigen antibodies 4th generation. That is ordering the entire algorithm. So that's basically standing in for the whole algorithm, and then you are going to put in one result for the whole algorithm. So instead of putting in the results of each individual piece of the algorithm, we are trying to give you information so that you can put in one result for the whole algorithm. And that one result, there are actually in this drop-down menu, there are now 10 possible options for what you are going to put in. So listed here, you can see the possible options under observation value are going to be acute HIV infection, false positive, HIV positive untypable, HIV-1 positive, HIV-2 positive, HIV-2 positive with HIV-1 cross-reactivity, inconclusive, retest, negative, and then it doesn't show you in the scroll down, but the one right under there is not tested. So if I could have shown you the whole scroll down, the 10th one listed would have been not tested. So on each of the next examples, I have saved this drop down, and you can see with an arrow which one we are asking you to select. Okay, so we're going to start easy with you ordered the test and then you canceled it. So the lab sends you back, you ordered this fourth generation test, but then it clearly indicates at the bottom the test was canceled by submitter. So into the EHR, you are going to select then not tested. And that was your facility's choice, or this was ordered by accident. You may want to capture in the notes that the test was not conducted due to facility choice, user error, whatever else. But the result for this will be available to you of not tested. So there is the other option where you'll get no results back. And that you sent off the specimen and something happened to the specimen, right? So in this example, the lab is telling you the temperature upon receipt in lab was unacceptable. So in this case, we don't want you to mark not tested because, yes, in reality, it wasn't tested. We do want you to mark, though, instead, inconclusive retest. And that's a sign that this person needs to be contacted and brought in for new testing because there was something wrong with the original sample, not because the facility or a clinician or somebody decided to cancel the test. So we're asking that notes are used to capture why the test was not performed. The client does need to be retested as soon as possible. And this option of inconclusive retest should be used anytime there is not essentially a complete result for that specimen. So even though no testing was done, we are not asking for you to select no test or not tested. We're asking you to select inconclusive retest. So those are some examples where you get back essentially no results from the lab. So some of the most common results you're going to get back are the person is HIV negative, the person is HIV-1 positive, the person has acute HIV, or this was a false positive. So here's an example on what it will look like if the person is HIV negative. They run the first test, this combo antigen-antibody EIA screening test. It comes back as non-reactive. The narrative that this spits out for you is that this person is negative for HIV-1 and HIV-2 and the HIV-1 antigen. And so from the drop-down menu, you are going to pick negative. No more testing is conducted on this person because the screening test is non-reactive. The testing at the state lab is done. But as we keep saying, if the person indicates that they were recently exposed to somebody that they know has HIV, or they shared needles, or they had unprotected sex, and they're concerned in the weeks leading up to this test, then please bring them back in for retesting. Okay, so that's if somebody's HIV negative. So now this is the idea where the first screening test is done, and it comes back reactive, which I've boxed out in red under result. And then when that's reactive, it goes to the next test, which is the Genius. It clearly says in the test type that it is the Genius test. The Genius test is going to give you a result for HIV-1 and HIV-2, which you see horizontally. But if you look right below the word Genius, that's the overall result for the Genius. And so the overall result for this Genius here is that the test itself is showing the person is HIV-1 positive. Again, the narrative below says positive for HIV-1 antibodies. And so for this person, you are going to mark that they are HIV-1 positive. Another example where you're going to pick the same result is where the screening test is reactive. It jumps down to the Genius test. Again, the Genius test comes back HIV-1 positive. You can see over under the individual HIV-1 and HIV-2 pieces that the HIV-2 piece came back as indeterminate. Because HIV-2 is so rare in the United States, this is considered just some cross-reactivity. Overall, if the test says HIV-1 positive, that's what you're going with. And so especially under where the negative is, or the narrative is saying positive for HIV-1 antibodies, overall, you are selecting that this person is HIV-1 positive. So those are the two examples where you're going to get back a clear answer that the person is HIV-1 positive. So now let's switch to some another example where you're going to pick inconclusive. So let's say you run the screening test. The state lab has enough sample for that. It comes back reactive. And then in your report, you see that the Genius test could not be done. And here they're telling you because the specimen quantity was insufficient. So all we're left with here is a positive screening test, and then we have no idea what the other testing would have come out to be. So here we're asking not that you select HIV-1 positive, here we are asking that you select inconclusive, retest. We would like for you to use the notes field to capture any pieces of the testing that were done and their results, and then also to capture why the testing was inconclusive. But most importantly, this person needs to come in immediately and be retested, or if they would like to go to another facility, that referral is made for further testing. But this person is not confirmed one way or the other that they are HIV positive or HIV negative. So it is inconclusive and they need a retest. So now jumping to two examples where the testing is telling you that you have found an acute HIV infection. So again, it's the same first screening test that has come back positive. It goes down to the Genius test, and now all of a sudden, the Genius test is telling you HIV negative. This does not mean that the person is HIV negative. It just means that that Genius test turned out negative. So by itself at the state lab, it is now going to require that a third test is done. That third test, remember, is a NAT test or a qualitative viral load assay. In this instance, when they jump down to the third test, which is trying to screen for virus, it comes back reactive. And so what you've got here and what it clearly tells you in the notes is that you have found infection that is consistent with an acute HIV infection. And the way this works is what happened up here at the screening test, it found the antigen. And the screening test can't tell us what it found, but that's basically what we know has gone on behind the scenes. So it was reactive for the antigen piece. The person does not have enough antibody, and that's why that part came out negative. But when they ran the qualitative assay, it found virus, and that's why it came back reactive. So this person is acutely HIV infected. If you look to the left, we would ask that you pick acute HIV-1 infection from the drop-down menu. And this is, again, where we would be asking that this person is immediately contacted, linked to care. There is a lot of evidence that people who have acute HIV that start on antiretrovirals immediately really, in the long haul, have a lot of improvement to their immune health. And also you are getting them the services they need and the interview from the DIS so that their partners can be contacted, because at this phase they really are quite infectious and have the capacity to transmit the virus much easier than people who are have been infected for longer periods of time. So this is really something that's going to be rare for your programs, rare in your office, but it should require really quick, immediate action from the staff. So another example, and the wording is going to be the same, is that you run that screening test, it comes back reactive, but the Genius test comes back indeterminate. Instead of coming back negative, it comes back indeterminate. Indeterminate tests are going to reflex to the qualitative assay as well. Often with the indeterminate results, it means it found some antibody but not enough. And so that could again be that window where the body is ramping up the amount of antibody it's making, and so you're still in that acute phase. So it reflexes to the third test, the qualitative test. It comes back positive, and then clearly in the notes it's telling you we have confirmed this person for HIV infection, and the infection is consistent with an acute infection. So again, in the EHR, we are asking that you select acute HIV-1 infection. And so finally, in this little portion, and then there's going to be a set of rarely used options. This is a couple examples of when you're going to get a false positive. So let's say you run that first test, it comes back positive. You run the Genius test next, it comes back negative. So just like before, a negative Genius is not the end. It's going to reflex to the qualitative viral load. And this time, the qualitative viral load comes back as non-reactive. So it did not find any virus in the body. So it clearly tells you in the narrative that antibodies were not confirmed. There is no lab evidence of an HIV infection. It tells you possible false positive. So in the drop-down menu, we are asking you to select false positive. If this person does not present with flu-like symptoms, does not discuss, recent exposures, most likely they truly are HIV negative. But if they do have flu-like symptoms, and again have expressed that that they've recently been exposed, they should be brought back in for repeat testing, because even though this testing is great, it still can miss people in that first week or two of infection where the body really hasn't mounted much of a response at all. So false positive, that's why it says possible false positive and not confirmed false positive. Again, you really have to listen to the client and what they're saying about whether or not you want to, try and get them back in for retesting. But again, for this instance, where the third test comes back non-reactive, then it's indicating that most likely that top screening test is a false positive, and that's what you can indicate in the EHR. One more example of when you'll get a possible false positive. Again, your first screening test is reactive. Your Genius test comes back as indeterminate, so it jumps down to the qualitative viral load. It comes back as non-reactive. And then the narrative clearly tells you you've got a possible false positive. So when that third test comes back positive, that's an acute infection. When it comes back as non-reactive, that's a false positive. And again, the Genius is only going to reflex to this third test if it comes back negative or if it comes back indeterminate. If the Genius comes back positive, it does not run this third qualitative test. So one more example of when you need to select inconclusive or retest is, let's say you get through the first two pieces. So you've run a screening test, it's reactive, it jumps down to the Genius test, you've got a negative result, and then all of a sudden what should happen is that it goes to the qualitative assay and, oh, there's not enough specimen. So this is a really sort of scary situation, because what this is showing you is either this person has acute HIV or this is a false positive test. But this amount of testing with a positive screen and a negative Genius is not enough to tell you whether or not somebody actually has or does not have HIV. So this needs to be entered as inconclusive retest. The notes field needs to be used to capture any pieces of testing that were completed and their results. So here you would capture the top two tests and the results that you were able to get, and then also capture why the testing was inconclusive, and immediately this person needs to be found and brought in to be retested because their testing is inconclusive. Okay, so those are the scenarios most likely to happen, and the ones least likely to happen really revolve around HIV-2. So we're going to stop here and see if anybody's got any questions or wants me to go back to any of the slides that I've shown. So you're all unmuted again. Does anybody have any questions?
The United States has HIV. They take antigens, which are taken with antibodies.
Everybody's good?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll mute everybody again. We're almost through the presentation, and then we can do questions at the end if you have thought of something else. Okay, everybody's muted again. So some of the options that are least likely to happen are when the Genius test comes back as undifferentiated or untypable, that you get an HIV-2 positive result, and we'll show you now what those look like. So let's say you run the first test, again it comes back as reactive, then you run the Genius test and it comes back as HIV-2 positive. In the EHR, we need you to select HIV-2 positive. For your work, there isn't much that is different here. This person has HIV. They need to be referred to an infectious disease doctor immediately. In that referral, it needs to be made clear that this person was tested positive for HIV-2, because the way people with HIV-2 are treated for their HIV can be quite different than treatment for HIV-1. You cannot run, we talk about sending people off to run quantitative viral loads. That is an HIV-1 test. So you cannot run a quantitative viral load from most laboratories on somebody that has HIV-2. They require special testing, special treatment. So that referral should still be made as quickly as possible, but the person does need to be indicated that they are HIV-2 positive. And like we mentioned before, this is often going to be somebody that was either infected while they were abroad, especially in countries in West Africa, or somebody that has immigrated from countries in West Africa or India. So here, again, it's not jumping down to the qualitative test. There's no reason for it to. That qualitative test is actually only for HIV-1 as well. So this is just two pieces of the algorithm, but this time the person came back HIV-2 positive. The next example is somebody that is HIV-2 positive as well. The top test is reactive. The middle test comes back. It tells you clearly HIV-2 positive. If you look at the individual sections, it actually came back HIV-1 indeterminate, but HIV-2 positive. This is probably some kind of underlying reactivity. And so overall, you go with what the test tells you, not the individual pieces. And overall, the test here is telling you this person is positive for HIV-2 antibodies. From your stance, they should be treated like anybody else who has HIV and sent off on a referral, a very warm referral, as we've talked about. This is an example where you're going to get this very long result from the Genius test, and again, it's going to be very rare. But the top test comes back reactive. The Genius test comes back positive for both HIV-1 and HIV-2. And in the drop-down menu, this long sentence does exist. HIV positive, untypable, and then in parentheses the word undifferentiated. So the test itself had enough reactivity for both HIV-1 antibodies and HIV-2 antibodies, but it could not differentiate between the two of them. This is incredibly rare. The test itself tells you it's incredibly rare, but it is an option that you may see. But there is an option for you in the EHR to capture this unique result. But again, this person has HIV, should be sent off. Any of these that come back with any sort of HIV positive should be sent off on their referral. And then the last kind of unique one is, again, the top test is reactive. The second test comes back with HIV-2 positive with HIV-1 cross-reactivity. So here it found a significant amount of HIV-2 confirmation antibody, and then it found just a little bit of HIV-1 confirmation positivity. So that's why it says it's cross-reactive in the title. Again, this is in your drop-down menu, HIV-2 positive with HIV-1 cross-reactivity. Please select that option. This person has HIV. The test just cannot tell the difference between HIV-1 and HIV-2. And then I believe the last one on here is when the test itself comes back and tells you that it is invalid or inconclusive. So this is another example where you're going to pick inconclusive retest. So again, in this example, and there's a number of ways that this could come back, but the top test is reactive. The middle test comes back as some form of indeterminate, gets to the qualitative assay, and it comes back as invalid for some reason. It specifically says under that, printed under that, it will say inconclusive, and then under further actions, it tells you, please request an additional specimen to repeat the algorithm. So for any of these instances where you do not have a final result at the end of the algorithm, we are asking that you pick inconclusive retest, capture the pieces that you did get and what their results were, and then capture a reason why it was inconclusive in the notes. So that, I believe, is the end of our slides. I'm going to unmute everybody again. So that, everybody's unmuted, just a warning.
Like the ones up on the stand, gravity. How does that one work?
You're all unmuted, so everyone can hear anyone who's talking right now. Are there any questions?
A handout with this all these slides.
Excuse me?
Can we get these results like emailed to us so that we can have all these the slide presentations so we can look back at these scenarios?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've recorded Jessica and I speaking, and that recording includes the slides, and so that will go out next week for sure.
And we'll send out the PowerPoint as well, just so you have a printed copy for your reference. And from the state, oh, go ahead.
So whenever you send in a sample and it gets to the point where it says there's not enough sample to complete the process, can you resubmit the rest, another sample? Is there a way in LIMS to indicate that they don't run the other test over? I'm sure these tests are quite expensive.
No, so every time really the algorithm needs to be run in its complete state. So you are going to draw a single specimen each time. It is just one tube. And the platforms themselves actually just are able to reflect to each other. There are stopping points clearly where if there's enough positivity done, you know, it's not going to move on to the third part. But that testing does need to be completed as a full algorithm, and you can't jump into the middle pieces of it.
I missed the beginning because I was trying to get on the computer, but which tube do you send the blood to the state?
This is
Do the fourth generation test.
Yeah, so this is for anyone who's already using the state lab. The state lab is located in Baton Rouge. This is the OPH Office of Public Health State Lab. So if you're not at a health unit, or if you're at some other testing site or clinic that uses a different lab, don't start using the state lab all of a sudden. Oh, I thought you were saying where is the tube sent, but you're asking what tube?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
And I don't know for sure. There will be guidance coming out from the state lab itself about the the quantity to draw and the tube to use. We're just over at the Office of Public Health, so we were just covering really like what the results mean and all of that good stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, and this, again, this doesn't roll out for another 2 weeks. Is that right?
February 6th.
February 6th.
Monday, February 6th is when it
So, yeah, so a little bit less than 2 weeks, and it will be a full changeover. And again, this is testing just for those facilities that currently use lab-based testing at the Louisiana State Lab. If you do only rapid HIV testing and you never send a blood specimen to the state lab, then the ask here is not that you start sending. This is really for those of you that currently do, what your current lab results, your current EHR screen is about to change.
And is there somewhere I can look for each region's representative, like contact person for this? For HIV training? For HIV training and treatment.
This is Julie speaking. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what you need, so let's talk off online. Anyone can reach me at julie.fitch@la.gov, so that's julie.fitch@la.gov, and we can figure out what exactly you're looking for.
Okay.
And make sure to reach out if you need, if you're not sure your best, referral for your newly positive clients, things like that. We'd like everybody to have in hand, really a full list of everybody that they're able to refer out to, especially when you're going to come in contact with somebody who potentially is being diagnosed with acute HIV, and you're trying to make a quick appointment for that person.
Okay, do I contact Julie for that?
No. No. I mean, I think the best thing is to start, if you are with a public health unit, to start with your regional nurse supervisor to get that list. If that regional nurse supervisor is not aware of what the options are for an infectious disease clinics in their area, then I'm a good backup. But I'm thinking that the regional nurse supervisors really do have this info. And those of you outside of regions 1 and 2.
Because that's kind of confusing.
If you're talking, we can hear you.
So if you're outside of regions 1 or 2, there are not very many possible referrals. The list is rather short. So there are more choices in regions 1 and 2. But again, start with your regional nurse consultant, and then I am definitely here for backup if that person is not sure where referrals should be made to.
Hello?
Yes.
Nurse in Region 9, can you send that to me, please?
Say that again?
I don't have that list. Can you send it, please? The resource list?
I'm not sure who's speaking. Can you shoot me an email? This is Julie at julie.fitch@la.gov, and we can take care of that offline.
Sure.
Thanks.
So somebody asked in the chat, so how long will patients have to wait to get these results versus getting an INSEE report in 1 minute? Again, this is not to replace the fact that you are doing rapid testing. For those of you that are doing rapid testing, not every facility is doing rapid testing, and so for those facilities that are currently doing lab-based HIV testing and send specimens off to the Louisiana State Lab, this is just to let you know that the testing the state lab does, the results that you receive, and the way that you enter it into the EHR will be changing in about 9 days. For those of you that don't ever send off an HIV sample to the state lab anymore, this isn't really changing much except to let you know that this testing is available. And so if you have a concern where somebody is showing up and they present signs that they may be acutely infected and they're telling you they've recently been exposed to somebody with HIV and their rapid test comes back negative, you have this to offer to them because this lab-based testing may give you that positive result that the rapid test is not giving you. And so this is, really good lab testing to help us to help find anybody that's positive. Specifically, it's got a built-in piece to help us find acute infections that previous lab-based testing didn't have. So for those of you that do rapid testing, nothing is changing unless you see a need for this based on what your client is telling you. Hopefully that answers it. We will most certainly send out all of these examples. If you get an example, if you start running this test and you get some results on here that are not part of one of these examples and you aren't sure how to enter it into the EHR, you can certainly reach out to myself. So that's Jessica Fridge. I'm the surveillance manager for the program, and I'm just jessica.fridge, just like refrigerator, at la.gov. Somebody else asked, what generation is the rapid testing? So rapid, those point-of-care rapid tests, whether you use one or two, they only look for antibodies. So they do not have the capability. No, they don't. They only look for antibodies. So they don't have the ability to detect acute HIV infection. They don't have the ability to detect that P24 antigen. So that's considered an older generation test. But the trade-off, if you're doing rapid testing, is that if you get two reactive rapids, you do not have to wait. You and the patient don't have to wait for a lab result to come back. You can immediately connect them to HIV care, and they can get started on treatment much sooner. So it's true that you're giving up the capability to find an acute, but as Jessica said, if you have someone with indications of possible acute infection, you now have this option in those special rare cases that someone is telling you that they, 2 weeks ago they slept with somebody they know is HIV positive, or I have a flu right now and my sex partner is an injection drug user, so that you have this additional option. But please, we are not suggesting that you stop doing rapid point-of-care testing if that is what you were already doing. And again, somebody asked, do we only order this test if the rapid becomes back reactive? Again, if you are doing rapid testing, you do not need to order this test. If you're doing rapid testing and you have 2 reactive rapids, you are immediately that day, hopefully, getting an appointment for that person to go to an infectious disease clinic, an ID or HIV specialty care doctor, so that they can get their viral load done there, because that's where they're going to be getting treatment. So it's, instead of bringing them back to you, you're sending them on to the place where they can get treatment. Any others, Jessica? I don't think so. Right now I'm scrolling through all the no audio ones. And we apologize for that again. So any other questions? Any questions about the algorithm itself or the test?
You may not even need it, but I can ask some other comments if you want to transfer.
Will the health units receive policy guidelines? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Okay, like this one right here is what I need the customer to look at. Okay.
Somebody just asked, will the health units receive policy guidelines? So we are unsure what that means, the policy guidelines. So if whoever asked that question could either chat some clarification about what they mean or speak up.
Dr. Holcomb. I think they're everything in the CALS is protocol driven, so they're waiting for official protocols on the usage of this product.
Okay. Yeah, and that's certainly not something that comes from the STD HIV program. So we'll make sure that request has been made clear. Yeah, I think we'll check with the lab on that, or Dale. All right, any other questions out there?
So,
once again, this has been recorded, and we'll send out the recording as well as the PowerPoint slides themselves next week. And thank you all for taking this time on a Friday afternoon, and feel free to reach out to Jessica or myself directly, and have a great day and weekend.
thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.